Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Ionit Behar, and I'm the curator here at DePaul Art Museum. This panel on Latinx Chicago photography is presented in conjunction with our current exhibition, Teresita Fernandez, Multiple Exposures. This show was curated by Joanna Skupinska, and it was organized by UC Riverside. It's been traveling for a couple of years, and we're lucky to be the last venue. We're thrilled to be able to host this timely and important conversation today alongside the show. I'd also like to take this opportunity to share that a new episode of Focal Point, which is a podcast of the MLCP, was released last night. So we collaborated with MLCP, and it features Christina in conversation with Natasha Egan, the director of MLCP. In this thoughtful exchange, Christina reflects on themes that are present in the artist works that we'll be presenting today, such as the enduring tension between photography and politics, the impact of their mentors, in this case, Christina's mentors, who includes the influential photographer and theorist Alan Sekula, with whom she studied at UCLA, and the role of photography, not simply as a tool for documenting reality, but as a political and representational force that shapes meaning. Christina also talks about the role that modernist Mexican photographers have played during her career and the way that photography has developed throughout her life. The episode is available on all kinds of podcast platforms, so please go and take a listen. I'd like to extend a deep gratitude to our partners who helped make today's panel program possible: DePaul Center for Latino Research, Gertie and Early Work, Latitude, and Colectivo Multipolar. Your enthusiasm and support have been truly meaningful, and it takes a village. And before we begin with the panel, I want to take a moment to celebrate emerging talent in the field. In collaboration with the Center for Latino Research, we launched a student Latinx photography competition and received a number of powerful submissions. The selection of the winner was reviewed by Professor Billy Johnson Gonzalez, the director of the center, and myself. We're thrilled to announce that the winner is Daniela Ochoa, who's here. So Daniela, please wave. Daniela is a sophomore at DePaul, majoring in user experience design and graphic design. So thank you so much, Daniela, for submitting your work, and congratulations again. Now, I'm honored to introduce today's panelists, Teresita Carson, Jonathan Castillo, Jonathan Vega, and Juan Molina Hernandez, 4 remarkable photographers working in Chicago whose practices explore how space, identity, and power intersect in urban life. Their work invites us to think deeply about the politics of visibility and the complexities of identity, not as fixed definitions, but as processes shaped by culture, memory, resistance, and imagination. As José Esteban Muñoz reminds us, identification and disidentification are not just about how we see ourselves, but how we navigate what the world expects us to be, and how those expectations shape our inner lives. The artists in this panel don't offer easy answers. Instead, they approach identity with vulnerability and nuance, questioning the very frameworks that define it. I look forward to hearing more about their practices and the insights they bring to this conversation. I will now introduce them briefly, very briefly, so please check more of their biographies. And then they will give the presentation of their work, and then we will sit here together for a conversation. We will have a Q&A, so please save your questions for the end. Teresita Carson was born in Mexico and is currently based here in Chicago. She is a multidisciplinary artist working across moving images, fiber, and installation. With an irreverent feminist lens, Terry creates counter-archives that merge the historical with the speculative, drawing from indigenous cosmogonies and the magical peripheries of experience. Her work is both critical and imaginative, offering new ways of seeing through layered narratives. John Vega, is a photo-based artist born and raised in Chicago's Hermosa neighborhood. His practice investigates the power dynamics embedded in photography, particularly its historical role in both honoring and repressing marginalized communities. John's recent work critically engages with carceral aesthetics, unpacking how systems of control are visualized and reproduced. Jonathan Michael Castillo is a visual artist, photographer, and educator based in Chicago. Utilizing photography, video, installation, and handmade paper, his projects focus on people, place, and social issues. Topics such as immigration, labor, economics, debt, government systems, and how those subjects overlap are prominent themes in his work. Driven by personal connections that impact himself, his family, and his friends, his practice stems from a broader commitment to imagining and contributing to more equitable and just systems for his community. Juan Molina Hernandez was born in Guanajuato, Mexico, and lives and works in Chicago. Their multidisciplinary practice spans photography, textiles, sculpture, and installation. Juan's work weaves together stories of home, lineage, memory, and archives, navigating themes of belonging and unbelonging. By recontextualizing symbols from culture, personal memory, and the built environment, they craft deeply resonant narratives shaped by the experience of multilingual and multicultural identity. Thank you again for being here. Thank you for listening as well. And now with that, I will pass things over to Terry, who will kick us off for our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming on a tornado warning evening. So if we're stuck here together, it'll be great. And thank you, Ionit, for inviting me. This is great. So I'm going to start us off with a clip from this film of mine, Monolith, that's been on this experimental film festival circuit for a while already. But I think that this clip will set the mood, put us in a science fiction kind of sort of mood.
La madre de los dioses me dice, no hay una sola forma de ser un dios. Estamos en constante movimiento, cambiando de forma y de nombre. En nuestro juego de doblego y desplego, intentamos de desafiar tus ideas sobre la identidad. Estamos tratando de abrirte a un mundo más amplio de posibilidades. Recuerda, Ixiptla. Tetehuinan me ha dejado con la tarea de escuchar lo imposible. ¿Cuál es la primera ley de lo que puede ser escuchado? ¿Dónde está el que habla? ¿Dónde está el que escucha? ¿Por qué casi nunca podemos escuchar a los dioses hablar por sí mismos?
I tend to meander, so I'm going to stick to the script because we don't want to be here until midnight. My work has always been shaped by interdisciplinary study, indigenous knowledge, cosmogony, science fiction, the undercommons, and counter archives have renewed my perspective towards a deeper planetary consciousness. I strive to discover the ways we can shift our treatment of our planet as an image, a preconceived stage where humans are the main actors, to a magical periphery where relationality, reciprocity, and mutuality can lead the way out of planetary collapse. I always turn to the medium and what it communicates. This questioning has led me to experiment with different media and forms. I started making lens-based images from an early age and have cycled through new media, fiber, sound, and many other ways of making. My ideas require that I experiment with many forms to create a discursive ecosystem of deconstruction and regeneration. In my current inquiry, this methodology manifests itself through scanning artifacts at the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City, stripping them of their photographic textures, putting them in a 3D environment, imposing meshes and geometries, merging with other 3D scans, animating them, 3D printing the new object, and so forth. I call this fictional archaeology, a speculative archaeology that fills the gaps that epistemicide left behind. My study of the Mesoamerican codices has deeply shaped my work. Their language, in Tlili, in Tlapali, is seductive and defies translation. More than books, they're verbs. I always ask myself, if the lens, imperialism's technology, demands the delimitation of the frame, how can I get past the frame's restrictions? I stop looking at the image as a verdict, and more for what it is, an event. So I arrive at the site-specific form, a continuous image composed of many images. Maybe a film that is not a film. I suppose that when you have been making films for a long time, you're always a filmmaker. But above all, I consider myself a storyteller. These scrolls shapeshift, adapting to sight. The images become a sculpture that holds a story that is code. The code is a clue. The clue is a way through. These two codices tell different but intertwined stories, where Return to Tepeyac is about longing, nostalgia, and a symbolic return. Codex Huipil is a futuristic creation story. Tepeyac is stolen photographs, Huipil in deconstructed and reconstructed speculative images. Return to Tepeyac began as a search for manifestations of Mexican immigrant presence in Chicago. One image kept on reappearing. Guadalupe, Tonantzin. Years later, I did not go to Tepeyac because she is not there. I found her in a dark room in a museum, out of reach. So I smuggled her out the only way that I could. By scanning her, she practically begged me to take her out. In this form, the incomplete and hollow goddess is broken up into hundreds of tiny images, fragments to be set free, removed from nationalist ideology. By taking away the monolith texture, stripping the surface, the photograph disappears. I have been reconfiguring images into a new visual language, a language that holds story but defies translation, a counter-archive to the archive that was destroyed. I ask myself, is it a return from the image? And if so, return to what? Put simply, my practice requires me to travel to 1492 and move backwards towards the future. Right now, I want to take a few seconds to honor my partner, also known as the unpaid intern, my personal preparator. And he passed away unexpected in January. So my work wouldn't be what it is without him. I got to be ambitious because of him and his skills, and we worked together, and he will live not just in my memory, but in the work that we made together. Thank you.
Okay, cool. All right. Yeah, thank you all for being here. Thank you to Ionit. Thank you to DePaul Art Museum. The work that I'm going to be sharing with you all today centers on two archives that are intimately connected through a family member, more specifically my brother. And so that's the two of us pictured at Reese Park here in Chicago. I just wanted to start with this image because it's a special memory that I have of our relationship, and also this kind of speaks to the lens that I see my brother through. And I refer to the two archives that I'll be discussing today as a double system. And so the first archive is our family archive. I spent time gathering images from immediate and extended family members, scanning them and preserving the images that they were willing to share. And so this collection, of course, captures more of the intimate moments that my family and I have among one another. And my family is originally from San Luis Potosí, Mexico, and I'm part of the first generation to be born here in Chicago. As was mentioned, I was raised in the Hermosa neighborhood. So in these photographs, there's a lot of firsts that I found. So the first child to be born here, the first home to be bought, the first family home, first graduation attended, things like that. But what I found more important was actually the images of my brother as I was kind of sifting through these images. And he's actually the first kind of grandchild of the family. And these images became especially important to me because they're really the only memories the tangible memories that I have of him since we stopped communicating about a decade ago in 2015. And so to be transparent up front, my brother struggles with multiple mental health illnesses. So he is schizophrenic and bipolar, and also struggles with substance abuse. So on the one hand, I have this deeply personal archive that I was living with, photographs that normally would never see the light of day. And on the other hand, I ended up doing a search for my brother's name online out of curiosity and concern, and which would bring me to an entirely different archive that would be available publicly online. And this is the second part of what I've addressed as a double system, and this is the institutional archive. And so the search led me to a website that looked like this, and I clicked on the image. And so this was not like Chicago Police Department or anything. This was just a random website that housed these images. And when I clicked on one of the images, it led me to additional lists of records, each documenting an arrest, but also capturing him changing throughout the time that I had not seen him. So I'm literally watching him age through these images. And then I did more investigation, and eventually the site led me to nearly 30 mugshots. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of emotion and tension going on when I encountered these, the image itself, kind of assumptions that would be made, guilt and empathy or lack of empathy. They became central questions to images that really have no context for the struggles that I mentioned. And so even now, these are still difficult conversations to have around mental health, especially in the Latinx community across generations. And I really wasn't leaning towards making work with these images, and so I kind of sat with them, and it took quite a bit of time to do anything else. But luckily, I was able to encounter a reading by Alan Sekula, which is called The Body in the Archive, and it gave me a new framework for understanding the forms, these images and the forms of photography that I was seeing. So in the essay, Sekula describes portraiture as a double system that is capable of functioning both honorifically and repressively. And I borrow the title as a thread to this essay, which Sekula examines photography's early history and its dual function as a medium. So on the one hand, you have photography becoming a tool for the middle class to kind of capture these precious moments, but at the same time, photography is being a tool used for policing to identify and categorize individuals. And then I continued to research, and one of the helpful texts that I found was also by Professor Michelle Smith, The Brief History of the Mugshot, where she mentions the tintype photograph, and tintypes were commonly used during the early invention of the mugshot. And so this gave me the idea and the feeling that transforming the image into a tintype, or an echo of a tintype, because I could talk about that process later, could reframe the photograph and center the focus on the process and the history of photography and of the mugshot. And in my findings, I found that the history of the mugshot is very much tied to the harmful pseudosciences of phrenology, physiognomy, and eugenics, systems that disproportionately targeted immigrants and people of color. So these are just kind of examples of the digital file being transformed. And so I had multiples of the images, and I transformed them. I arranged them in a grid format to mimic what I found was this image on the right, which is known as a rogues galleries. So it's used as a method where police departments would compile all of these mugshots and display them internally. They would also share them with the public, which encouraged them to identify individuals and more broadly to associate certain visual traits with criminality. So again, going back to eugenics and phrenology. And unlike, these are kind of 27 of them. So unlike the private family photographs, these institutional images publicly mark the subject as criminal regardless of context. So it became important for me for what existed along with these images. And so I went ahead and I attached 2 digital photographs that I made. One is Loretto Hospital and the other being Cook County. And so these are both have a relationship to my brother, but also speak to this broader issue where individuals are cycling between these 2 places, what is known as a revolving door phenomenon that occurs. And in addition to these images, along with the other 27, I include a text that is taken from the actual Cook County Sheriff website, and it's posted besides the photographs, and essentially it states that on any given day, up to a third of those incarcerated at Cook County Jail suffer from some form of mental illness, making the jail one of the largest mental health hospitals in Illinois and one of the largest in the country. And the majority of the inmates are often in jail due to nonviolent offenses closely associated with their mental health. So more recently, when I tried to find this on their site, it's been removed, but luckily I was able to capture the screenshot. And so kind of what I've been talking about here and what you've been seeing in the presentation is, I think, like a final iteration of what the work will be. I've been kind of thinking about a show that's going to happen in November, and so this is the first time that the family archive or the family album images and the institutional images will both be in opposition of one another. And I am putting these together and also thinking about that maybe putting this work aside for a while or entirely, just because it has been a bit more difficult to work through. But it is a work that is rooted in, obviously love for my brother and for my family. So beyond this, I've tried shifting my focus away from my own family to explore broader narratives, which, for example, this series, which I've titled Against the Gray, uses the familiar cues from the mugshot. So it takes the fragmented body, puts it against this kind of gray background. But I've been kind of reflecting also, and some of this work moves about more slowly, and I'm kind of open to the idea of like going in another direction at the moment and finding work that perhaps maybe applies or brings more joy to the process of making. And I think that's one of the things that I also took from like Christina's new work, in which she's like photographing her son and kind of his time in suburbia. But yeah, thank you for letting me share with you all.
Thanks everyone for coming. My name is Jonathan, and I'm going to show you two projects that I've been working on here in Chicago. My first one, titled Immigrant Owned, which started in 2017 and is ongoing. The project is a combination of environmental portraits and photographic interiors of small businesses across the city, focused on immigrant-owned and operated businesses across the entire city and now greater Chicagoland, even beyond the city, with goals to take this actually to other cities, pending funding and things like that. But the titles are always the name of the business, the neighborhood with the year, very simple, or the first name of the person who's pictured. I started the project when I was in graduate school, new to the city, recently had moved here after living in China for 2 years, and making some similar photographs with some of the small businesses in the neighborhood. I'd been living in Zhuhai, and a community of that's largely South Asian and the African quarter of Hong Kong, which I won't show that work tonight, but eventually it'll be on my website as well. The work in this project is really seeks to honor the contribution of immigrants to the city, to the individual neighborhoods that they're a part of, and kind of by proxy, create a positive narrative about immigrants and immigrant communities in the country, which making this all the way back in 2017 during the first Trump administration, this conversation was happening already, but I think it's even more important now than ever. Now that we're having all of the record deportations, and every time I pull up the news, there's another story of someone being ripped away from a family. So the project itself is not focused on any one particular group of people. It is very broad, purposely very broad. I, have lots of conversations with people, talk about, their journey, show them my work, see if they'd be interested in letting me photograph their store or be part of this project. And it's overwhelmingly, I have a very positive response when people see the photographs and want to, be included in it. I'm also very purposely broad in that I define immigrant as well to groups and to families who keep their immigration story alive in their business. So a business who says was founded by our immigrant grandparents 3 generations ago. And we still have this sausage shop in Rogers Park, completely fits in this project for me, because I feel like one of the reasons why we end up with very nationalistic, anti-immigrant rhetoric is because people lose track of those origin stories. So, I purposely, when I've expanded this work in more recent years, have set out to, broaden it further than it was when I was doing it in graduate school. It's a really fun project to photograph. I find myself in some of, basically if it's a store I might have no other reason to go into. You know, like I'm really not in need of any Indian wedding dresses, you know, but you know, I find myself in, you know, some of the best restaurants in town, some of the most colorfully, beautifully decorated spaces, and you know, sometimes there's places that just really surprise me or have overlap with other people who I'm meeting. Like there's a photographer who I was in a show with last year who turns out had photographed in this very same Polish flower shop. And we were in a show together, and I found out that she has a photograph of this same space, but it looks different, on her website. And then I found out later that there's this picture of this pigeon from the drapery shop across the street, because the woman who runs that has this pigeon that, like, these pigeons that she feeds and lets into the store. And I photographed the same exact pigeon. So little surprising things like that are kind of really fun to run into. I'm very interested in space and how people organize space, just from a kind of, photo nerd, visual kind of way. But I mean, at heart, I think I'm a portraitist. I've always made portraits, and I think environmental portraits are my absolute favorite. It's just anything that can kind of tell a story about who someone is, what they do, what their life is like. The guy who owns Yummy Yummy Noodles, I was photographing him in the front of the store and doing this very nice portrait of him in his chef's smock, and in front of the counter, and I look over and his dishwasher is in the back sitting on these boxes, and so I asked afterwards if I could make a portrait of her as well, if she'd be interested, and he said okay, and asked her, and she said yes, and I could see the draining out of him that, oh no, this is going to be the photo he uses. not him in front of the shop, ruling over it. So this is now hanging in O'Hare Airport, 7.5 feet tall by 11.25 feet wide. So yeah. One of the things that I kind of noticed when I was making this project is that, there's a lot of small businesses that will do two things at once. Like, this is actually a hair salon, and then they like turned this one section into a convenience store. And it's often an indication for me that, maybe that business is kind of struggling. They're trying to do a couple things at once so that they can, make ends meet. And sure enough, this hair salon closed after I had returned a while later. And I had a similar story with the toy store in the beginning, which was initially a convenience store, but then changed over to a toy store. Something else that really interests me in this project whenever I can make it work is when I'm photographing in a place and people have their kids running around, and if I can make a photograph that incorporates extended family members, that's something that is kind of near and dear to my heart. When I was a kid, my father had a computer store, and I used to, basically be a total terror in the store and running around, and we were causing too much trouble. We were told to go play in the parking lot behind the store, or go bother the guy who owned the pet store next door. So I spent a lot of time in my dad's small business growing up. So it's something that gives people the autonomy to make their own living, but also if you can't afford childcare, the kids can just do what they want in the store, and it's you have that ability to do it. We should make it law that like parents can bring their kids to go work with them, or whether they're at Starbucks or wherever. It would make everything way more homey. Some of you may know Alcala's on Chicago. It's like, I'm going to pass through these real quick. And I'll just quickly show you a couple images from another project because I'm bad at managing my time. These are at O'Hare. So just very quickly, these are some images from a project where I was photographing in unaccompanied children's shelters. These are shelters that take care of kids that are that come over the border without their parents. So these bags are bags of clothes that were ready for children when they arrive in the shelter, but at the time during the first Trump administration, they used Title 42 during the pandemic to keep all migrants out. So these are all bags of clothes that would have gone to kids that didn't. They're run by a nonprofit organization called Heartland Alliance that contracts with the government to take care of these kids, pregnant teenagers. And these shelters all came together through a legal agreement called the Flores Agreement, where there was a legal case that stated you can't keep immigrant kids who are coming over the border without their parents or arriving at a port of entry without parents in a jail system. So they had to create this shelter system that's kind of akin to our foster care group home systems. And this is the last couple images.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today. So I'm going to share a lot of images because I'm a maximalist, and that's what I do. So my practice expands a lot of years. The first I guess, series that I want to share is started in undergrad, and it was called When You Leave. So this was a series that I created in undergrad at the time. So at the time, I was thinking about a lot about ideas of belonging and nostalgia and memory, thinking about ideas of where my family comes from. So my family's from Mexico. We're from Guanajuato. We came to the U.S. when I was 6. So I was doing a lot of self-portraiture at the time, like, again, dealing with ideas of belonging, thinking about ideas of wanting to be seen and also wanting to hide. And then I started photographing family members, so thinking about my relationship with my family members, my parents, and also taking images of our interior spaces, documenting the home. And I took this photograph, which I started thinking of, how do I take photos of people that are no longer present? So I think of this as an image of my grandfather. And this image surfaced from a conversation with my mother. In my family, we've always kept pets in our home, usually birds. And I remember asking my mother about her love, like, do you really like birds, or why do we always have birds? And I remember she said, it's always good to have animals in the house, because when death comes knocking, it's better it takes one of them than one of us. And I asked her if she believed this. Yeah. So my mom basically said that the reason why she keeps birds in the house is because it's always better to have animals in the house, because when death comes knocking, it's better it takes one of them than one of us. And I asked her if she believed the superstition and where it came from. And it's something that her mother taught her and something that her grandmother would say. And so I don't really know where it comes from, but I think a lot about ideas of like colonization, right? And the things that colonization took away from us. And obviously part of colonization is epistemicide, right? Killing the ways in which people understand the world. And so I created this image and kind of thinking about that. And so it's called Guardians and Sacrifices, and it's kind of about that idea. And I started thinking about ideas of thorns and hair. And I was also given these photographs to digitize, so photographs of my family members. And I love the fronts and the backs, and so I photographed those. And that was really when I started interacting with my family's archive. And from there, I took those images and I started making books. I wanted to create objects that didn't have to exist within a gallery space, something that could be held and taken with you and like handed off. And so I kind of experimented with that. And then in 2016/2017, I had the opportunity to go back to Mexico for the first time. And so these are just some images from that body of work. I was thinking about all ideas of relationship and memory and family. And so those are those images that came from that. I think of this as a self-portrait. So again, taking portraits of people without the figure being present. And then from there, in 2019, I was invited to be part of an exhibition, and I remember the curator asked me, like, if you could describe your work in one word, what would it be? And I didn't really have an answer for that, because I think my work kind of touches on a lot of different subjects. And so we decided she shifted the approach, and she's like, all right, let's think of a word, and then from that word, you'll pick images that you speak of that. And so the work we settled on was distance. And so I selected images from the bodies of work that spoke to me of distance, and I configured them, and this is how they were displayed. And then I had my first solo project in 2019, and it was my first large-scale installation. And so I started thinking of the space and wanting to recreate my grandmother's garden. And I had photographs that I took in Mexico at the time, mixed in with photographs, digital, Polaroid, film, and also photographs that I brought back from Mexico from our family photo albums. And from there, I started really thinking about the idea of home as like a site of resistance. And I'm referencing Bell Hooks' essay called Home Plays a Site of Resistance, where she talks about the labor of Black women in creating spaces where Black people could exist outside of white supremacy and outside of racism. And then in 2020, I really started thinking about ideas of protection and safety. I think a lot about Sandra Cisneros and her talk about the sky as being something that can keep you safe. Conversations about this idea of clouds. And some of these other essays that also influenced my practice. Essays, poetry, a lot of things influenced my practice. And so from there, I created this body of work. So again, thinking about ideas of protection, safety, family, the blessing, the home. And then from there, I started creating smaller scale installations. So these are a little bit smaller than some of the first one. And again, thinking about ideas of protection and the archive, I kind of took these memories of Mexico with the shards of glass that to me always read as really beautiful. And I created these frames to encase photographs of my family members that I brought back from Mexico. Thinking about ideas of protection, again, safekeeping, how do we keep the memories of those people we love alive? And then Return, or Regresa, which is my second solo show. And again, thinking about ideas of home, the garden. And so in this case, I was thinking about the garden as a site of remembering, but also as an altar. And so I kind of transformed the gallery into this home. And I took a step away from photography for a bit, and I kind of started experimenting with sculpture, some textiles. So these textiles are embroidered with my hair. Some more textile pieces. And writing is a part of my practice, so I had some writing involved as well. And then from there, I'll just share this piece. So again, thinking about the archive, the photograph, and so I took those, this is like the second iteration of the frames, but I removed the concrete, and I just kept the shards of glass. And the shards of glass kind of from the right light kind of read like crystals. And again, thinking about ideas of protection and memory and like safety. And from there, I had this other piece, which is a portrait of my great-grandmother, which is embroidered with my hair. And even though I took I stepped away from photography, the photograph is always a big part of my practice. And I look at the archive and I reference the archive. So this is the image of that. And then my last solo project was last year, and it was called Not to Disappear at Lake Forest College. And so I'm still exploring these ideas of belonging, nostalgia, memory, and thinking about the processes of belonging, right? The ways in which people build spaces to belong. And so I had a lot larger space, so I was able to really explore that more. And the piece that I made there was this bird cage, which, as we know, is related to this image. Our last parakeets died like 5 years ago, and the bird cage just kind of sat alone. And so I kind of took this cage, encrusted with shards of glass, and kind of made it an homage to them. But yeah, as I mentioned, like photography is a big center of my practice, but I think dealing with a lot of the history of photography, the way photography is used, as we've spoken about, is like a tool of power, a tool of like for eugenics and all these other things, kind of made me step away from that for a little bit. But it's something that I think is still very prevalent in my practice. These are just some images for that exhibition, and that's it.
Thank you for your presentations. Incredible work and lots to process. So I have some questions prepared, but I also want to make sure that we have time to hear you and your comments and questions. And we can also go back to images as we speak. So if there's anything that you want to go back to, or you don't have time, you, Jonathan, because I really want to, hear more about that second project. So we can always go back to that. So I'll begin by saying that several of you engage with archives in your work, whether personal, familial, or institutional. And this theme of archival exploration feels central to many of your practices in a way or another. So Terry calls it a counter-archive, yeah. And then my colleague right here, Diana Ledesma, refers to some of these works as photographs of photographs or meta-archives, right? So I find that to be a powerful way to describe how some of you are not only working with archival materials, but also reflecting on the act of archiving itself and what gets to be remembered, what gets left out, how visual culture plays a role in shaping these kind of personal but also collective histories. So my question to the group, and whoever wants to take in first, how do you see photography as a tool for preserving or challenging memory? I know it's a big question, but you can take it wherever you want to. And in what ways does it allow you to construct or complicate narratives around identity, history, or community more generally? Any one of you wants to? Yes, John? Yeah.
I think one of the questions that I have with like the archive is regaining agency, and like how do you do that? More recently, I saw a show at Filter Photo that was really inspiring, called Contra el Archivo, and I just used the archive to reflect on like where I come from, like my own personal identity and things in the past that I don't necessarily have immediate access to, since my family kind of has spread apart. But then working with the question of like, okay, now I have it, and what does that mean, and like, how can I use it to focus on the work? And I think the family archive versus like the institutional archive is such a different thing for me, but I'm still trying to reclaim a power from it. Yeah.
I use the word counter-archive a lot because I always have to think about the knowledge that was destroyed. Being post-colonial subjects, that's always, I remember the first time I heard, I was a child when my grandparents told me what happened to the books in Mesoamerica, to the Mayan books, that only 4 Mayan books remain, and just, a couple of dozen of Mesoamerican books. And there were thousands and thousands, and how there's no way to get them back. So that even though I did not understand, and I understood at that early age the repercussions of such an act, such a violent act. And archives are violence. You know, they're objects that render a verdict about whatever the powers, whatever the center wants them to be. Like a photograph, right? A photograph is delimited, it renders a verdict. But if we start to look at a photograph as an event, right? What's outside of the photograph, not what's inside. Who took the photograph? What are the different angles that we're looking about? Who's outside of the photograph? Then we begin to see a dynamic where different histories emerge. We'll never know. But that's why I turned to science fiction, you know, in order to fill those gaps. Because even though scholars, you know, study the Mesoamerican books that try to decipher them to see what the histories were, you can never really know. And you're not really supposed to, because indigenous knowledge doesn't work like that. You know, it's not an absolute. A river is not a thing, it's a verb, it shifts. So it's the ship shifting, and there's no, it's disidentification, right? It's a moving target. And so I prefer to think about the work that I do in that way, because it points to the violence of the archive, which, you know, Foucault said, the archive is the first law of what can be said, right? And you can't dispute it, right? It's written versus the repertoire, which comes from the global south, which is performance, sound, all these things that can't be, well, now we can have recordings and things like that, but still it's a tradition of performance. And it's a different dynamic and different kind of knowledge.
I think that you know, the archive, I find a lot of the things that like Terry's talking about very interesting, and a lot of that history I think you're talking about comes down to who was excluded, who was included, you know, what's worth preserving. And I think we're living in a time where, you know, it's really challenging, but we're also living in a time where many of the gatekeepers, if not most of the gatekeepers of the archives, are very much interested in filling those gaps. You know, I mean, why else would it be on this Latinx photography panel, right? And if you go to the Chicago History Museum, they're about to open a show aquí in Chicago. And that came from a recognition that the Chicago History Museum had this huge gap in their collection about the contribution of Latinos to the city, right? So, you know, through some pressure from high school kids who went to a field trip and then like said, hey, what's up? Why is this stuff not here? They went on a multi-year project to collect oral histories and photographs and all of this stuff to add that to the record. And I find that really heartening, you know, like those, I think those kinds of things are give me hope, you know, that like, that there's room, you know, like these archives are ever expanding, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think of the family photo album as like a counter narrative, right? Because the family photo is something that is created by the people that are pictured in the image. It's not something that's created by like, you know, the government or like Hollywood. It's something that is inherently created by the people for those people. So that's kind of like my engagement with the archive. These are my family photographs, and I think of my practice as an expansion of that archive. And so that's why I show images of like my family from like 1995 next to an image that I took in like, you know, 2000, because like it's all connected to me. But like I said, I think I've been I'm very protective of my images. Like all of the work that you saw, it's not on my website. Like I have like 4 images on my website, because I am very aware of like the ways in which people want to consume these images and the way that people want to like take these images and use them for their own purpose and to create their own stories and their own narratives. So I'm very protective of my images, like I said, and that's kind of why I stepped away from photography for a little bit. Like, cause like I had photographs of my grandparents, and somebody was like, I wish I could have included this in the Day of the Dead exhibition. I'm like, they're not dead, right? Because like the reading of images of certain people, it's like always attributed to ideas of like death and violence and so on. And so like, yeah, that's kind of like my some views on the archive.
I want to mention, just to give a little bit of context too, and how these art history of Latinx art, but more specifically Latinx photography, has been increasing, but it's recent, right? I mean, there's a remarkable book that came out 5 years ago now, Latinx Photography in the United States by Elizabeth Ferrer. So I like to just reference it here. And early in the book, she highlights the significance of this platform that was founded in only 1974 in Foco in response to the civil rights movement. And that is still active today and was created to support mainly Latinx photographers and writers, artists who were often excluded from dominant art historical discourse, the canon, and the mainstream art world. And I wanted to quote what she writes, and she says, as the photographer/subject, relationship shifted from outsider-insider to insider-insider. The photograph became less an ethnographic document than an autonomous and self-validating form of individual and community expression. So I'd love to ask you how that, and you were talking a bit already about this, but how does that statement resonate with your own practice and how your approach to photography, how your background and your lived experience has influenced, I mean, in so many ways, your practice, but not only with photography as a medium, but just as a way of self-representation, perhaps.
It's funny because when I started doing photography, I was like the newspaper photographer, and I did like sports, and I thought that my idea then, back in the 80s was photography is just like Ansel Adams. You got to create like these beautiful pictures. I didn't have any mentors or people telling me that there was something else happening, mainly conceptual art, until a professor, turned me onto it. And I started just using myself and my family, but like in these like weird performative scenarios in the house. And just looking back, and that has continued, and I think it has to do probably with the fiction and the narrative, I became a filmmaker after that, so I think that's like a natural progression, I guess. But I mean, I hate being in front of the camera, but then a lot of the things that I've done with photography, I'm in front of the camera, and films as well. And it was this idea of being aware of my gaze and not trying to impose my gaze into others. Therefore, I'm just gonna make my family do this, and they were pretty good. I mean, they put up with a lot. They, I used to buy like awful and like put them, like hearts and test things in their face, and they were like, do it, for the sake of art. And just kind of looking for that, weird identity type of thing, but again, my history in the United States is not the typical immigration story. There's no such thing as typical, but like the one that people coming across the border legally, and then there being a first generation and second generation and all that. But I have always been aware of the problematics of putting the body on display in that way, and especially now. So yeah, it's tricky but again, for me it has to be a moving target. Going back to like, there's no such thing as identity. Like, let's get that straight. There's only identification. We participate in it. Right? We say, oh, I'm like this, but you're participating. There's no such thing as like, you're gonna be like this and this is who you are. That's why we have conflict, right? With our families, with our friends, like, no, this is not what I'm supposed to be. So it's something that we actively participate in. I think I've always not wanted to do that. Even before I read, Jose Munoz, like it was kind of like already in there, yeah, with this idea of performing for the camera.
Jonathan, the immigrant-owned and the, yes, just like your relationship with the different communities, because it's not only the Latinx communities. So if you can speak about that.
I'm photographing very broadly and widely. Often in many communities, I'm not even, from or have spent a lot of time in previously. I'm looking for a thing that's unifying, across those places and groups. And I guess I was born here. I never had my own immigration story, but I lived in China for a couple years, and working on a tourist visa illegally, got on a very, very low level, got to experience the idea of well, if I get caught doing this, I could get bounced out of here. So I have this very kind of lower level sense of what those kinds of struggles are like. But I know that in my own family, my grandmother came here undocumented and struggled and had all of these issues and had to find her way. And so my identity is really it's not so firmly it's not fixed. My mom's side of the family is Swedish way back. My dad's side is from Mexico, but 3 generations back. So, I've always kind of felt in between and never firmly fixed in any space. I grew up more with the white side of my family in Southern California, and then we'd take this trip to Texas, and I'd be in the middle of my Latino community, my Latino family, and we'd go over the border to Mexico, and then it's whoa, this is a whole nother thing when I'm 8 years old discovering that for the first time, so, and then spending some time abroad and really knowing what it's like to be a foreigner, somewhere, really, I think, influenced me a lot before I came to graduate school. Having to learn to be culturally fluent in, any place I am. So I think that really informed a lot of my work, how I, find myself in all of these many different places.
When we were planning this panel, you asked me, should I only include the Latinx businesses from this series, right? And so we had a little bit of a conversation, but no way. The whole project is the breadth of it. It's the city of Chicago, right? Yes.
I said it and immediately regretted it.
Yes. No, I know, but I think it's an important question just to think about, which takes me to this other question of language that is always evolving, and the terminology that we use to describe ourselves and our work is never perfect. It always should be evolving. We should always be questioning and redefining it. So I wanted to ask you all to reflect on that terminology of Latinx photography, which is how we named this panel and this context, and how that label sit with you, if you find it expansive in terms of community and visibility, or does it feel limiting, or maybe it's something else entirely. Not an easy question.
I've always wondered how people come up with names and labels, and then they change them, when it's okay, that's not enough, that's not adequate, let's move it, let's call it something else. So, we need, for sake of brevity and, to be inclusive and to, say, okay, Latinx is this and that. But I think it's useful up to that point, but I think that the question that we should be asking as part of this group, this community that we find ourselves in, what are our contributions to the field? And as individuals and as part of a community, what are we contributing? Not just to knowledge and material culture, but also to our community. And then how do you how do you make that, package it into a way, you know, like label it? I don't know how you do that. Like, right, like does Latinx include Afro-Latino, you know, and you know, but that's just, again, this trap called identity, right? That we feel like we have to define ourselves in order to be able to say we exist. And I think we really have to get past that, you know, because that's not what the knowledge from the Global South teaches us. It's very different. The way that people view themselves in the Global South and indigenous communities. They don't try to put themselves in a box. Yeah.
This was like a tough question, and I know you kind of gave us a little insight that you might ask this question. So I kind of wrote something because I was like, how do I answer this really tough question? I took a class with Dr. Manuel Ortega at UIC on sentimentality, and he challenged us to think about, not about identity, but about identification, and thinking about everything as like a process, right? Because when we think of things as a process, we understand that they're not inherent, that they're constructed. So you don't talk about identity, you talk about identification. You don't talk about race, you talk about racialization, right? Because in understanding that these things are not fixed and that they are processes, we understand that they are systems and histories that constructed these like labels that we call ourselves. And so like, yeah, when we think of like these labels and how they're constructed, shaped by systems and histories, we realize that people aren't born Latinx, right? That through colonization, people came and colonized the Americas, and they called it Latin America, and that's where we speak Spanish and all these other things. We understand that like we aren't inherently like Latinx. And so when we understand that it's constructed, it allows us to ask questions about why these labels are constructed and who do they serve. Sometimes the labels are thrown upon groups by people outside of those communities, and sometimes they are adopted by people in the communities for movement building and organizing. An example of this is the Chicano movement, right? That was like a label that people took on for themselves. But I think it's really important to talk about, when we talk about labels or markers, and we try to define what it is or what it means, it also, we define who belongs and who doesn't belong. And so Latin America is a region that might have some similarities, but it encompasses a lot of different people with a lot of different histories and a lot of different backgrounds, class, and languages. So when we try to lump all of them together or try to say what their photography or images look like, I think that becomes like really reductive. And so some of the questions that I have is like, why do we want to define what Latinx photography is? Who does it serve? And who does it hinder? And so those are just like some questions that I thought
of. Yeah, I definitely don't have an answer for that. So I'm kind of sitting here and absorbing that. And on another note, sometimes I think about my friends and some of these conversations that we have that they might not necessarily commonly have among one another, because I also acknowledge that like we are in a privileged space to have these conversations, and sometimes saying that a panel is going to be talking on Latinx photography could kind of be inviting to certain individuals as well. I just wanted to say that as well.
I didn't realize the time. And please, questions, comments. Well, thank you for responding to my questions. And I want to turn it to you. We can pass around the microphone. We have maybe time for 3 questions or so.
Hi. Yeah, thank you. This is awesome. What's your name with the Detroit hit?
John.
John, thank you. Yeah, your whole presentation like spoke right to me. I empathized highly. I got a brother, struggling with taking his medication properly. I myself am like in recovery from substance abuse. I've been like, inextricably in the criminal carceral system for decades. Been in recovery for like 8 years now, and man, the note you ended on, where you're searching for the hope in this story, I just want to like kind of speak up a little bit and say that I like see a lot of it. You know, I'm here kind of unofficially for where I work, not a mental health nonprofit, and man, I was like at mental health court at Skokie Court last week, where folks who, you know, mental health court is like when people come in contact with the criminal system due to mental health situations, they get a chance to you know, get that, to address that stuff. So I guess my question, you know, to address that stuff and get it expunged from their record after successful completion, which is like a really cool thing to see as someone who's not a big fan of, you know, the prison system and whatnot. But my question, I guess, is, well, I want to also applaud you for it seems like you did a lot of processing of your family pain through your art, which is rad. But I wanted to ask if you kind of like, if you would mind speaking on how your family, you and your family kind of communicated, talked about that stuff around your brother, around everything going on, if you don't mind.
Thank you for sharing that too. This was one of the things that I brought up in the convo that we had previously. It is difficult to talk about, and I think individually I would be happy to talk more about it. And so there is a lot of processing, a lot of things with my family, and again, like this work, and that's why I said previously, like in this last question about these kind of conversations and the work being a little bit, who is it accessible for, and like who is it for also, and it is for me as well as like visitors of like a gallery space. But I think with my family, it's a very different thing, and I kind of acknowledge that I do acknowledge that like my relationship to my brother is one, and his relationship to others is a very different thing, and so I have to be very sensitive to those things as well. Even in like this panel, didn't necessarily like promote it because this isn't, you know, somewhere where I want to just lay it all on them. Yeah, so I'm happy to talk about it more individually, but yeah, thank you.
Hi, thanks so much for speaking, all of you. I was wondering if the panelists could expand on whether or not the locality of Chicago has played a role in your work, or like if being here has changed your work. Obviously, John's work is pretty Chicago-based, but I'm just interested in the idea of Chicago Latinx photography and whether you identify yourselves as Chicago, you know, photographers, or if that's played a role in your work.
Yeah, before I came here, I was, like I said, was doing a bunch of weird performance stuff. And for me, sight really informs what I'm doing. But definitely I have a lot of projects going on in Chicago. I live in the South Side, so the built environment there has been very fruitful for me. But you know, it just depends. Like I joke about like I'll never go on a vacation because I go places and all I do is work. You know, document, take, you know, shoot Super 8 film, always working. So because the work that I presented here, like I was in Mexico studying with indigenous people, you know, and that's what came out of it, you know, from like being there for a month, you know, in the periphery of Mexico City. But Chicago, yeah, I have several projects that are here, and it just keeps on growing. But yeah, Chicago I lived in 56 different houses in my whole life, 13 different cities. And Chicago is the first place that actually has felt like home. And who knew that a girl from Mexico, from, you know, Mexicali, Baja California, would feel at home in the Midwest? I could have never guessed it, yeah.
I think for me, I think my practice wouldn't be what it is today without the Chicago art community. So like my first solo show at Roman Susan, like I literally just graduated from undergrad. I took like 2 years off. I applied for this exhibition as part of like a mock trial with like the Chicago Artists Coalition through like the fieldwork residency there. And so I was just like, I'm gonna apply, and I made this proposal. It was like it was basically a homework assignment. I didn't think I was gonna get it, and then I got it, and I was like, oh, I actually have to do this thing that I said. And so yeah, when I had to do it, I was like, okay, I've never done an installation. I have only printed photographs and put them up on walls. Like, and I have to like paint and like move plants and do all these other things. And like the fact that I've never done that before and that they gave me the permission to do that, like I think, a lot of other places wouldn't do that. Like Roman Susan, for those of you that are not familiar with the space in Rogers Park up north, it's closing in September, so you have like a few months if you're not familiar with it. But it's a really beautiful space where people are really able to experiment. And so yeah, I feel like without the Chicago artists run spaces, and the Chicago art community, my practice wouldn't really be what it is today, or maybe would have taken just a lot longer. I always think of this quote by Audre Lorde, which is like, we must love and nurture the creative parts of each other without always understanding what will be created. And most of the time when I'm like making stuff, I'm like, I don't know what I'm making. Like, I'm just gluing shards of glass to this thing, and hopefully it'll look good. Or like, I've never sewn with hair, so I'm always doing these things that I've never done before. And like working with like Chicago artist spaces, and like curators and people that like just do it. Like, I feel like, I don't know about other spaces, but I feel like that's very unique to Chicago.
It would take a lot to get me to go back to Los Angeles. I mean, I actually like that there's seasons here. When I first moved here, people were like, oh, you've never done a Chicago winter. And then I'm like, I don't even put on a sweater. I really love Chicago in so many ways, but I think the art community has been one of the biggest draws for me here. I mean, my work is very much about place, I think. And sometimes that place can expand. Like, I think my immigrant-owned work is going to expand to multiple cities, but I have, a project that I do that was in LA. Like, and people have told me, why don't you do that one in Chicago? And I'm like, no, that's the LA project, or there's a one that I work on in Hong Kong, and that one's gonna stay there. So I think place plays an important role across many of my projects. But the thing that I didn't really expect with my immigrant-owned work was how well it would connect with city government. I've been doing a lot of public art. The works at O'Hare. I got commissioned for a second project that is connected to the immigrant-owned project, has overlap with it. It looks very similar, but it has a different demographic focus. I photographed Black and Latino businesses on the south and west side, specifically in conjunction with the citywide planning initiative. And that work's actually up at Midway Airport when you come out of the secure part of the airport, if you're coming there. And I'm making a new book that's printed. It's coming out very soon, and it's going to be free. We're just going to give it out. It's like a 1,000-copy public art book that we're giving out. And how all of the work that I'm doing connects to different city departments, like the planning and development department was really interested in the work because I ended up photographing all of these businesses that got these city grants, and it like ties alongside of some of the initiatives where they're trying to spur business growth in south and west side communities. I just happened to photograph all of these businesses that the Chicago History Museum was like doing oral histories with. So the way that my work kind of runs into overlaps with all of these other kinds of institutions and city departments is something that was really surprising to me, specifically here in Chicago. I've never like had that kind of experience with my photographic journey anywhere else. So
maybe two last questions, because I can't say no to Diana Solis.
I just want to say thank you, because all of the work is fantastic. It's beautiful, wonderful. It's also incredibly substantive in terms of like, excuse me, my voice, in terms of like what is happening in our lives today. Is we live in the present, but also we look towards the past to be able to relate to our present situation. Otherwise, without that, who would we be? I also feel that we function in terms of identification and identities, not so much as one thing. When they say Latinos or Latinx, it would be really hard to do a show of everybody and put all those peoples together from the continents, right? So, saying that, I'm going to refer to Juan's work, which I think is incredibly beautiful. I'm really curious about the glass because I'm familiar. I'm from Mexico, and with the shards of glass to keep people out of your space. But at the same time, when I was looking at your frames, they're so beautiful with encasing your family members. I almost thought of it as almost keeping something out as well. That for me, it works both ways. It's not just protection, that they are being kept out, encased, because they are physically enclosed in a box, whether it's concrete or filigree. And with that, with those shards of glass, it is like they are being kept out for a reason. And that's kind of my, what I'm seeing in your work, even though I'm familiar with your work, but yes, thank you.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, this is like a practice that's very common in my community where I come from, and I found out it's actually very common in a lot of other parts of the world. And I think people sometimes see it as like crude, but I just remember like watching it and like the way like the light catches the shards of glass. And so the shards of glass are actually from the alley behind my apartment. Like I cut through the alley to get to the Pink Line all the time. And yeah, I think the second iteration of it with like the gold frames, like I was cutting through the alley and there was like this glass sliding door. And I remember in the morning I saw it, and then in the afternoon somebody had smashed the glass so they could take the metal frame, and just like I just remember seeing the shards of glass and just the way the light caught it. And so I went and like I scooped it up and like I washed it and I cleaned it. And so I think, yeah, it is meant, these objects that I'm making, they are meant to be like beautiful and like alluring, but they're also meant to be like dangerous, right? Like this is something worth protecting. And so that's kind of the way I see the work. It's like, yeah, it's like, it does like keep them safe, but also keeps them, like I said, it keeps people out. And so I think, as I mentioned, like ideas of protection and safety and the ways in which people want to consume certain images or want to like put certain stereotypes or biases on them. And so that kind of, I think the shards of glass acts as a way to keep some of those, like metaphorically keep some of those things out. Yeah, and I think, I mean, it's also related to ideas of like hechizos or spells, right? The ways in which taking these objects and materials and kind of transforming it, like I said, from far away, kind of, they read like crystals and they get closer and you're like, oh, these are shards of glass. And so the spell kind of breaks, but it doesn't fully break because it's like bound in my mind by like labor, imagination, and also like love. But yeah, that's kind of like on the shards of glass.
Mm-hmm. Okay, last question. Who, I don't know who.
Okay. So great collection of storytellers, all of you amazing. My question is actually for our curator and our panelists, Ionit. So in talking about Chicago, in talking about Latinx, I'm actually an immigrant myself, originally from El Paso, recently moved here 3 years ago. But one thing I knew about Chicago is the Mexicanidad, like the Mexicanness. And all of our storytellers up here mostly have a Mexican background. Right. And so then your choosing of the Latinx over saying that these are Mexican or Mexican American, yeah, what was the decision to go with Latinx over saying like, oh, these are more Mexican? Are there more wider conversations? And overall, I mean, these are really great people to bring. I love all of it. And so what was the biggest message that you hoped that everybody would get from this collection of artists?
Thank you for that question. I didn't realize after the fact that we were yes, representing mostly Mexican American, or I don't think everyone in this panel would self-identify themselves in the same way. So I think for me the conversation was broader than that, and I want it to be broader than that, and hopefully it was. And just thinking about this panel in the context of Cristina Fernandez's work, I thought that these artists, beyond their places of origin, would have something to say or bring in conversation with the works downstairs or right here outside. And that's what I hope to do every time I do refer to something being part of a Latinx context, right? It's like these broader questions of, as I mentioned in the introduction, right, responses to the built environment. I mean, I think the relationship to home, it's not something, yes, there is a predominant Mexican population in Chicago, so I think this is a pretty accurate representation of where we're at. But I'm not Mexican myself, right, so, and I can still very much relate to all the topics that are being brought up. So I hope that answers, yeah. Well, I want to thank all of you. Please get home safe. And thank you to